alaikum wa rahmatullah. How's everybody doing?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Great to see you, everybody. I see a lot of faces that I recognize. I didn't know, mashallah, a lot of the community come here to John Jay, mashallah. It's good, good. So we begin, of course, in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we try to begin anything in our life. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. All praise belongs to Allah. And we begin in His name, and we ask Him to send His peace and blessings upon His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all those who follow in His footsteps. We ask Allah Ta'ala to make us of those who truly follow in His footsteps in the most sincere way. So I'm going to go ahead and stand, I think, because the chair is a bit quite low. It's not really reasonable, but it's probably better that I stand. So the clip that we just saw, how many people are familiar with that series? So that one was produced, I want to say 10 years ago, maybe less than that, by an Arabic production company, it might have been in Kuwait. And they do, I think the series is something like 30, 40 episodes. It's pretty long, and each episode is about an hour. They document the life of Omar, radiallahu anhu, the second Khalifa of the Muslim Ummah. And in it, I know that some brothers were asking, so they do depict the Omar, Ali, Uthman, and Abu Bakr, the four Khulafa. They do not depict the Prophet ﷺ in his image. They just like refer to him. So it's really a good series. I've only seen a small amount of it in the beginning, but it's one thing I do commend them with is that they stuck true to the narrations that occurred within Omar's life. So they're pretty solid in terms of their dedication to it. And the clip that we just saw was when Abu Bakr passed away. Abu Bakr being, who was Abu Bakr?
First Khalifa.
The first Khalifa after the Prophet ﷺ. So he had passed away, and this episode starts in which the Abu Bakr had appointed Omar as the next Khalifa. So there were different ways of succession. So one time it was left up to a vote, and other times and so on and so forth. In this instance, it was an appointment. So the people already knew Omar was going to be next, and he was giving his inaugural speech to the people. And that's pretty solid in terms of the actual narration. So all these things that he was saying, where the people were worried about his harshness, and he was saying, I was harsh during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and now I've calmed down and so on. That is in fact what he did say. So our goal today, so we can have a focus point, our goal today is not to talk about how he came to Islam. The ayat that were recited at the beginning from Surah Taha, those were the verses that Omar radiallahu anhu heard from his sister, and that was what finally led him to accept the faith. He entered, the faith entered his heart, and he accepted Islam based on those. You can look up the story, you can in fact watch it in that series. So we're not going to go that far back. We are actually starting from the life of Umar radiallahu anhu, may God be pleased with him, as the Khalifa. So after, and that's why they selected this part of the series, in which he assumes the leadership and he begins his journey as Khalifa. So does anybody know how many years he remained as Khalifa? Yes, brother?
10 years.
10. Good start. Very close. Where do we go from here? 12, yes. Who said that? Excellent, yes. He was right about 12 years. Umar radiallahu anhu was Khalifa for about 12 years. Abu Bakr, before him, how many years? Am I hearing it? Someone said it here. 2. 2.5. So Abu Bakr, the Prophet ﷺ passed away at 63 years old. Abu Bakr was Khalifa for about 2.5 years, then he passed away of natural causes at 63 years old as well. And then he had appointed Umar before he passed away. Umar radiallahu anhu being the right-hand man also of the Prophet ﷺ. So we want to take it from here in the sense that I'm just giving you an image and an understanding, if you want to make a mental map of where we are in the seerah. So at this point, the Prophet ﷺ has passed away, Umar radiallahu anhu has passed away, the Muslim Ummah has grown quite exponentially, and many of the Sahaba that you're familiar with, Ali radiallahu anhu, Uthman, Khalid ibn Walid, Al-Muthanna, these that you've heard in this video, they're all alive, and they're all still doing their thing. Bilal is alive, Abu Hurairah is alive, most of the major Sahaba are still alive, and a lot of change happened in the Ummah within those 12 years. So again, our focus point is just a few instances with Umar's dedication to justice within his leadership. So if you want to have a goal in mind, we're going to observe and examine some instances in Umar's dedication to justice during his time as Khalifa, during those 12 years. So when it comes to Umar radiallahu anhu, a lot of traits come to mind based on what we've, what we know about his life. So shoot some adjectives my way. What are some words that come to your mind when you hear Umar? Brave, right? Courage and bravery.
Just.
Just. He was a very just man. Wise.
Fierce.
Fierce. Strength. Firm, yes. Kind. So he was kind, but is that we usually get the opposite, what he mentioned in the video, harsh. I know we want to avoid, I'm noticing we're saying fierce, strong, brave. It's a great thing. We want to avoid any negative terms for someone so great as Omar, and that's a great thing. That's a great respect that we're showing. But just in the video right here, he's describing himself, saying, people think I'm harsh, or people have been saying I'm harsh, and he said, and they're right. They were not wrong. One thing I really love about Umar radiallahu anhu, and you see this over and over in his life, is that he would always admit his faults. He would never, you'd expect it from a harsh, he was, by the way, the video, the movie, or the series, sorry, I don't know if they depict him exactly as the descriptions I've read about him, because he was depicted as a broad-shouldered, tall, strong man. So he was, that's what, when you read the narrations of him, so he had a presence. Like just a physical presence when he walks in the room. His voice, I think they got that right, his voice was deep and strong. And when he presented himself, he was different. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was soft, and his voice came out soft, and he was also an excellent leader. But there's not only one size fits all for leadership. You might have the speak softly but carry a big stick, right? You have the Abu Bakr style, and Umar's style was different, but just as effective in its own way. So he was kind. The sister that mentioned, he was just read about like how he interacted with people. Inshallah, we'll get into a few instances where we can observe that part of him, which was a major part. But yes, there was harshness in his style. There was harshness in his approach, and it's one of those things that makes you realize that Islam is not here to mold you in the sense that it deletes who you are. Abu Bakr, like I mentioned, was extremely soft personality. He was very kind and very forgiving, and willing to drop his rights and to move on and to move forward for the sake of, just that was his nature. Whereas Umar radiallahu anhu, he believed in the rule of law, and he believed in being excessively harsh with those in power and overriding some of their rights. So he would acknowledge that yes, technically it might be their right, but they're in power, so I'm going to bring them down, as he mentioned. I'm going to have them put their face to the ground until their rights, like basically I'll keep pushing them down until their rights are given, like the rights they owe to society, and then I'll let them back up. So he acknowledged that I'm going to be a little bit overly harsh with those who have strength and have power in society in order to keep them in check. Whereas Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu did not have the same approach. What's right is right, right? But he wanted, Umar had a different one. So, when it comes to power, here we're observing Umar radiallahu anhu, a simple man from the Arabs. He's at this stage in his life, he was late 40s, 47, 48, maybe something like that. When he accepted Islam, it was early 30s. So he's about 15 years into Islam at this point. In that range, right? Maybe 15 to 20. One of the writers who wrote extensively in the Arabic language about Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, when he's starting his book, he wrote, what do you think would have become of Umar had God not guided his heart to Islam? He would have just been another one of the Arabs. He was in a decent tribe. It wasn't like the highest level tribe, but he was well off, he was rich, he was well known, strong, etc. He would have, been somebody in Arabia. He would have got some status, some power, and then he would have died, and then been unheard of ever again. And he was known for his harshness. He was known for, he would not have been molded or edited, I want to say, trim the excess with Islam, and then Allah brought him even more forward. And that kind of power that he assumed when he becomes Khalifa, the equivalent of modern day, like a president, king, well back then it was the equivalent of a king. Obviously he made sure it wasn't like that, but that's all the power they knew back then. They didn't know the concept of checked power. where you have a king or a Khalifa at the time who was checked, who had to answer to his constituents. That's something that in 2018, it's normal to us. We expect that from our leaders. They should answer to us. You can sue the president. You can hold them accountable. You can, take them to court and win, an organization and an individual, right? Back then, that was unheard of. You're a king, you assume power. And that goes to your head. Power corrupts. And power tends to also, not only does it corrupt a normal person, but it also tends to attract the person who was corrupt to begin with. Because they're willing to do what it takes to get that power. So they're willing to step on people, they're willing to cheat, they're willing to lie, they're willing to act immorally and unethically. However, when it came to Umar radiallahu anhu, it was, and Abu Bakr before him, of course, and the Prophet ﷺ was the most perfect example. It was a case of power humbling, which is insane because you don't really expect that whatsoever. Especially from a strong personality like Umar, who when he was younger, when he was, as a right-hand man, he was fierce and strong, and people worried about his harshness. When he became the leader, he became humble. And that really never happens in history. So it's really an interesting thing to keep in mind. I'll give you an example that maybe you will keep it close to, maybe you'll remember from your life. Have you ever seen somebody in a relatively small position of power go on a power trip?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was a quick answer. So yeah, it could be anybody. It could be a manager somewhere. It could be an employee sometimes, and they don't even have that kind of power, but they just in that moment of anger and so on, or a manager, a professor, a teacher, a speaker. Some of the brothers are familiar. Yeah, that happens all the time. We observe it. Sometimes when you give it some thought, you say, "Oh my God, this person really got deluded. They got a big head over nothing." And that's the nature of man, is that you get a little bit of power and you get deluded, you think, you know what, I can command people now, things can happen under my control. However, Umar radiallahu anhu, you'll observe from here and just pick up any book about him and see any narrations about his life and how it just made him basically weaker and weaker, humbled him lower and lower. And that's something that I don't think that we can ever truly appreciate, because for the most part, alhamdulillah, and I think this is a good thing. The vast majority of us will never experience that kind of power, and that's a good thing because that's a responsibility more than it is a status and something to be proud of. So, on topic, what is one of the key details or one of the key traits that you will find, a recurring theme, I'd rather say, in the life or the leadership of Umar radiallahu anhu, was his keenness towards social justice. And the word social justice in 2018 now is a bit of a buzzword. So it's what does it even mean? So let's start there. When you hear the word social or the term social justice, what does that mean to you?
People getting their rights.
All right, so excellent. That's a good start. So people getting their rights. What else we got? Perfect equality. So perfect equality. The word equality is definitely another one of those buzzwords. Do we actually mean equality, meaning everyone is exactly equal, or do you mean that everyone gets what they need? I think I like that better. Rights, because you're not going to treat a child equal to an adult. So the child gets a lot more leeway when they make mistakes, and they get a little bit more help, a lot more help, right, than an adult does. So equality is a word that we all know what we mean by it, but I believe it's one of those buzzwords where we don't actually mean what it literally means in the dictionary. So what you mean by it is that everyone gets their rights. So a child deserves more rights than an adult, and so on and so forth. Someone who is disabled, you don't say, hey, you know what, we gave you the same door as everyone else. No, you gotta make it. You put a ramp and so on and so forth, right? So giving people in society their due rights.
Let's say the equity.
Equity, yes. Equity versus equality, right? So equality is the buzzword, and that's why if you hear me speak and you come to my classes and so on, you'll see me very often. I make a point of making sure that we don't just get lost in buzzwords and say, oh yeah, definitely, no, I stand for this, I'll put it in my profile and whatever. No, you got to know what you're supporting and know what you're standing behind. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything. It's a good thing to bring up. Oh, Jazakallah khairan. So you're talking about the perfect balance was Omar understood that there was a balance, and when he gives the example that the strong, I will take the strong and I'll bring them down until their faces are on the ground. until they give rights back to society, then I'll let them back up. So he understood that that's what equality meant to him. That was the balance. All right, great. I like that. So good. You redeemed yourself. Excellent, excellent. What else we got? I want to hear at least two more. When you hear the word social justice, what does it mean to you? Social justice. It's two words. I'm not going on until we hear some more. Yes?
Justice in society.
All right, so you're defining justice with justice. That's a cop-out.
Two words, I'm just saying.
Well, so what does it mean? Justice in society, what does that mean?
From the bottom level to the top, make sure that everybody has their rights.
All right, so that's something along the lines of what we said. Everyone gets their rights.
Due diligence.
Due diligence, I like that. Yes, due diligence. So what do you mean by that?
When it comes to social justice, like if someone is, let's say, like for punishment, right? Depending on punishment, on their social economic backgrounds, or how things like someone's stealing when they need to steal, they don't need to get their hand cut off or whatever.
So due diligence, meaning it's not equality. Again, we're talking about that word. It's not one size fits all. And Omar radiallahu anhu, his entire 12 years just exemplified that. He was the ultimate, example of changing things up and saying this is not going to be one size fits all, and we have to understand it based on socioeconomic backgrounds. And I'm not treating the weak like I treat the rich and the strong. He made that very clear, and you're going to see examples that might be like weird to you, but you can appreciate him setting that precedent. Jazakallah khair. We'll get one more from the sisters. Privilege. So what does that mean? Where are you going with that? I like it though. That's definitely something I've written. It's part of the topic.
Just social class.
Okay, so what do we mean by privilege?
I think like a caste system. It has to do with like social justice, eliminating caste systems.
Okay.
Like tribes, one having more power than the other based on status.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And not just, do I need the mic, by the way? Can you guys hear me well? In the back, can I get a thumbs up? All right, excellent. So I'm just going to drop this because the echo is really annoying me. All right, so if anybody has trouble hearing, let me know. So yes, privilege is a very good one. So yeah, not necessarily, well, caste system is like strictly defined, but privilege would just in general be that some people are better off than others. That's like as simply as we can put it. So Omar radiallahu anhu, that was a big deal to him. And he made sure, he said, I'm going to balance this out. Even if it means, and I'm repeating this because you're going to see examples of it, even if it means the rich lose some of their rights. That was his philosophy. So Abu Bakr didn't agree with him, and Uthman, who was the next Khalifa, definitely didn't agree with him. So you can see that they both have a right. Like they both have an argument, sorry? They both have an argument to be made. But Umar, this was his philosophy. And he stepped on some toes. And that's where he said, my harshness will be completely directed towards this aspect of society, and we're going to explore some of those examples. So the concept of social justice, Jazakumullah khairan, a lot of these ideas are exactly what I had in mind. And it's a really broad topic. It can be explored so many times just from Umar's life, based of course on the Quran and the Sunnah. But today I would like to explore just two main categories. So the first one is Umar's cautiousness when it came to government power and when it came to people in power. So we talked about how he treated rich, he sort of like said, I'll bring down the people of status, whether it was status due to nobility, like lineage or whatever, because they did have a tribal system that still had a great, strong effect in people's minds. Whether it was, so modern day that would be race, ethnicity. So he said that's one of my focuses, anybody who's deemed higher level. Whether, like I said, ethnicity, whether it's wealth, whether it's government. Because he realized, I inherited the rule of Islam now. I inherited the rule of this nation, and the nation has grown. And the things that used to be done unofficially, because it was small, we're talking about, he became Khalifa 3 years after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. So about 15 years prior, the Muslim Ummah was like 1,000 people. 1,000 people, you don't need a prison system. You don't need a police force. You don't need a court system. The Prophet ﷺ is there. Even if he wasn't someone delegated to be there, and it's easily handled. How many cases are you dealing with per day in a population of 1,000? 15 years later, now you're talking about 200,000 or 300,000 people. And by the end of his 12 years, it was over 1 million. And it might have been even 2 or 3 million Muslims. And it was spread out far and wide. Now you need systems. And now he's like, I have to be the one to rubber stamp and sign off on these systems. Obviously, he's not doing it all on his own. He's delegating, but at the end of the day, he approved of this system. We'll talk about 1 or 2 of these as we go forward. So first category is cautiousness when it came to government power. We're not talking about wealth, I'm talking about status and ethnicity. Specifically, I want to talk about government power because he's setting up a government. So he's like, I'm going to keep it in check as much as I'm able. That's number 1. Our second category will be his awareness about the human rights of his constituents, about the people living under his rule. His awareness of the human rights. So notice these 2 categories. I chose them because we're talking about two opposite segments of society: the rich and powerful, or the people of status, and the average everyday individual who more often than not is just not wealthy, just maybe poor, maybe just middle class, etc. So I wanted to just take a look at how he deals with that section of society versus the other one. Any questions so far? Comments? All right, feel free during the course. I don't mind being interrupted. I like to, if it goes on into a discussion. If we stray too far away, I'll bring us back. All right? Okay. So, when I say he had cautiousness, he was wary when it came to government's power. What do you think I mean by that? He was cautious, yes?
He didn't glorify the government?
Good. So he's the government, right? He's the head of the government. So he didn't glorify it. So he didn't aggrandize it and say, okay guys, now I'm the leader, look at me, as we observed from his humbleness. And this is well documented, by the way. Of course you might say it's been dramatized. I told you, I really commend them for sticking to as much as they could, obviously, because you're going to add in fluff here and there. But it was definitely, they stuck to the actual, when it came to speeches and narrations, they stuck word for word sometimes. So he didn't say, he was humble throughout. And you're going to see a few examples of that. Thank you. What else we got? He was cautious when it came to government, the people in government. Yes?
Yeah, it was like modern day checks and balances. He made sure he checked himself.
Yes, yes. So he was a pioneer in that. Now I'm not too familiar, honestly, with the Byzantine Empire before that, because I do know the Romans had certain advances in government where they would hold the people accountable. So I'm not going to claim that Omar invented it or Islam invented it, because that kind of justice did exist. However, I don't know to what extent. What I do know is that Omar, at least in this region of the world, pioneered a lot of checks and balances. So for example, he insisted that the judiciary branch of government is its own independent branch, meaning judges and the courts and so on, it's not under his command as the Khalifa. And that's what we have today, the 3 branches of government in the US and in the modern Western world. Now you go to Egypt or you go to one of these countries, on paper they have that, but in reality, no one's suing the president. Right? And so, they refer to as president, but he's really like a king, a modern day king, right? And in Saudi Arabia, no one's suing the president and getting away with it. Whereas in the US, you can. You can sue the president and win. And Omar, you're talking 1400 years ago. And he could have said, he didn't have to push, he's the leader. He doesn't have to push for people to criticize him and get at him. But he insisted that the judges that will be appointed and the entire system as it's developing from day one, it's not going to come back to me. Meaning I'm not head of it. He did appoint judges and so on, but he said at the end of the day, I am accountable. I can be accountable to the court system, which is revolutionary, and especially in that part of the world.
Was that his personal preference or is that an Islamic principle?
It's a principle. It's mainly based on Islamic principles. So nothing that he did was just simply how he felt. So he was, one of the narrations mentions as كان عمر وقافا عند كتاب الله. Umar radiallahu anhu he would always stop at the boundaries of the Book of Allah. So that was just his lifestyle. Anything he argued in government, and we don't have time to get into all the narrations. You can, if there's a point that interests you, you can look it up in the future on the internet, make a note of it. Everything that we discuss here, he held councils for. That was one of the things he also did. He would make a council and just discuss that topic before he introduced it. and they'd go back and forth. Sometimes they'd override him, sometimes he'd override them with his evidences and so on. So yes, he based it always on the Book of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala and Islamic guidelines, and because obviously we as Muslims we do agree that even the leader can be held accountable. I mean that's as basic as it gets. We believe that the leader is not appointed by God. The leader, I mean, in fact, just yesterday we were doing like this interfaith thing, and one of the questioners was Christian, and he was asking me, what is the hierarchy in Islam? Like today, do we have like an equivalent of the Pope? Do we have an equivalent? I forgot, you mentioned some titles that I'm not familiar with. Where if they pass the verdict, like equivalent of a fatwa, it's law, and that's it. He can say with confidence that, disobeying this, you're definitely, makes you definitely, what's the word, accountable, and you're definitely sinful, you're definitely going to hellfire. So I told him, no, we don't have, there's no God-appointed hierarchy. We cannot say, and ever since, the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who was the last, the messenger of God, after that, Abu Bakr, Omar, and everyone after them, they're just the best fit that we can see. We need, a nation needs a leader, or needs several leaders, depending on who in the world, and that's just how it is. We hold them accountable, they're humans, they're fallible, they could be wrong, they can be questioned, their decisions could be questioned, etc. So that's an interesting thing. Yeah. So that's definitely an Islamic concept, an Islamic guideline which Omar was following to the best of his ability. And there was plenty of examples of him holding his governors accountable. And one of the things that he did was he introduced a department in government to gather and investigate complaints about appointed officials. Again, this was revolutionary for that region. I'd love to say that was revolutionary in the world in general, but I'd have to do some more research about the Byzantine Empire and even the Persian Empire and the other empires around the world. Did that exist already? Because otherwise we'd be claiming credit for something that wasn't ours. However, it was still in just that region, and that absolute power that he could have had, that was revolutionary. And he put that to work immediately. So here's the interesting part, subhanAllah, the humbling part, is that he primarily, especially at the first few years, he appointed the Sahaba. Because he's brand new, the people who can trust. So it wasn't favoritism, it was like, look, I'm dealing with 200,000 people, and I need leaders that I know. I mean, how are you going to appoint people I have no idea their character? So in the meantime, he appointed all the Sahaba that, he said, these guys, they gave their all for Islam when there was nothing to gain except, there was no promise of riches and wealth and land. There was only death. So these people, he knows their integrity. They truly believe in the faith. So he appointed Abu Huraira as a governor. He appointed Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. He appointed a bunch of the well-known Sahaba, and a lot of them resisted, by the way, due to their sincerity, and also due to some of them, they did not want to work under Umar because of his harshness, which we're going to observe right now in a minute. He was harsh towards leaders. He said, he made it very clear that under my leadership, government is a burden. It's not a status. You don't celebrate, that you got a position. Finally, I'm a governor now. You call me Amir, call me this or that. You mourn that you were appointed by Omar. So a lot of the Sahaba resisted, and they would say, I don't, until he forced them. He would call them to Medina, and they would be in whatever region they were, and then they would come in, and he would insist that they take the position. Sometimes they would take it, sometimes they would resist and reject it, and then he would have to let them go. But for the most part, they took it. And by the way, not all of them resisted in that manner, but there was instances of that. So part of the conditions that he held on his appointees, and these were like governors, and for all intents and purposes, in a region, let's say Iraq or Bahrain. So Abu Huraira was the governor of Bahrain, which is still modern day Bahrain. He was the governor of that for a short time, and for all intents and purposes, you're the leader, the absolute leader of that area, because communication with the Khalifa, communication with the higher ups takes weeks and months. So people, your constituents, they want to complain about you, they have to travel and whatever. So as far as it goes, you're the leader. You're the end, the biggest, the highest in that area. So even with that, he made sure it doesn't go to their heads. And here are some of the conditions. He put a lot of conditions. Here are some of them that he would put on all government employees. I don't know if this includes like the very low level, like postal workers, etc., or if this is more for like leadership, governors, district generals, whatever they're called, army leaders, and so on and so forth. So he forbid them from riding the highest quality horses. So the highest quality Arabian horses, they were not allowed to buy them, even with their own money, by the way. All these conditions, some of the people he appointed were already wealthy. They had their wealth from business and so on. So he said, if you're going to be a governor, you're going to be a leader under my rule, these are the conditions you meet. And I've opened up a department in government that will reach to every town in the Muslim world, where the people will be told directly that these are what your governor owes you. And you can complain to the department. You don't complain to the governor about the governor, so you can chop off your head, right? You complain this independent department, they'll be going around, Muhammad ibn Maslama, one of the Sahaba, he was the head of that department. And he set up delegations in different areas of the Muslim world where they would collect these complaints and then go straight to Umar, if need be. So he made sure they're accountable. They do not ride the finest horses, they cannot wear the finest clothes, they cannot eat the highest quality flours. So flour was a staple food of the Arabs at the time. It was a staple carb, and they cannot eat the highest level. So the Prophet ﷺ, if I'm not mistaken, the hadith goes that in his lifetime, he never ate the highest quality flour. Partly because it was not available all the times, and because he did not lead an extravagant lifestyle. Whereas with us in the modern day, that's all we eat. And if you've ever eaten like low quality flour, where I know in Egypt they have like a certain bread where it's like it's known, and you can tell immediately. It almost tastes like it has sand in it. I don't know if that's like available all over the world. And like you could hear, like the crunch is a weird kind of crunch where it's like sand. So subhanAllah, we on a regular basis, we don't even consider it a luxury to eat that kind of high quality flour. That's just our norm. Whereas he forbid his governors from, they cannot be spotted in the market buying it. And the people would complain. And by the way, the people abused this system. When they realized that they can, if they didn't like a ruler or a governor, they realized all we have to do is complain to Omar, now we can get into loads of trouble. And they used it in some regions. Notably, that's why one of the reasons why Abu Hurairah, he was the leader of Bahrain for a limited time, I think it was 2 years, and then he said, I'm not taking a second term. And Omar insisted, and he said, no, absolutely not. He just didn't want to deal with it. He said, I can't work under Omar. Abu Hurairah was a very humble man, but he just said, this is not for me. Another example was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, who was a very wonderful human being and very humble. And there was a few, again, he was, if I'm not mistaken, in the Sham, in the Syrian region. And again, he was complained about to Umar, and it was a long story, but at the end of the day, after all the courts and it went through, he was found that a lot of the allegations were lies. And he was allowed to go back. But that's how seriously Umar took it. These were Sahaba, these were great people who put their life on the line. But he said, no one's above the law. Including now his own son. So we talked about these rules. His son, by the way, he forbid his direct family members from getting any position in government. No governor, no, when he passed away, he left a council, before he had passed away, he left a council of 7 people to decide, to vote between them who will be the leader of the Ummah. These were like advisors and closest companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And he forbid, they said, put your son Abdullah, because he's a great, like he was in his own right a great person and a great companion of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, absolutely not. My son will not be included in the vote, even if you all vote for him. Even if he's literally the best one amongst you, he's not getting that privilege. And he considered it a burden. And he said a very famous quote. He didn't consider it a privilege, I used that word incorrectly. He said, it is enough for the family of Omar to have to deal with this once. It is enough of a burden for the family of Omar to have to answer to Allah for all of these, for this burden of leadership and the decisions I had to make. We don't want that more stress and difficulty in the afterlife for the family of Omar. And he said, again, we don't want this. Another wisdom of his and his foresight was he didn't want it to become like a kingship. Because you appoint one leader, then you appoint his son, you say, well, technically they were appointed, but what happens a generation later? People are like, oh man, then you just keep it in the family. And it's surprising how natural it is for people to just say, you know what, kingship, now in the modern day, we think of it as how backwards is that? What, you're just going to appoint their son, just because they're related? That's ridiculous. But it's natural for people to say, you know what, just keep it there. It's simple. It's easy to think about. Like we think, because we're in New York, in the modern Western world, we think that people would resist kingship. No, people were all for it historically. For a lot of times, obviously there was rebellion and so on, but for the most part, people preferred that. And they would rebel and they would get annoyed when they would be out of the family. I'm talking about the commoners, the actual constituents. Okay, so we'll get to in a minute to his son Abdullah and a story from that. But there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to Abu Dhar, anhu, who was a very a Bedouin. He was a Bedouin type companion. So he was very harsh, very not much in tune with, you know, all the details and the intricate details of like city life and so on. So Abu Dhar asks the Prophet ﷺ, "Ala tasta'milni?" He said, he saw him appointing people, delegating them for like positions and go do this in Yemen and come back and so on. He said, "What about me?" The Prophet ﷺ gave him some advice. He said, Abu Dhar says, he mentions that the Prophet ﷺ put his arm on his shoulder. So he's being very friendly and very close to him. And he said, "Ya Abu Dhar, إنك ضعيف وإنها أمانة وإنها يوم القيامة خزي وندامة إلا من أخذها بحقها وأدى الذي عليه فيها." So he said, "Oh Abu Dhar, you are weak, and this is certainly a position of trust. And truly on the day of resurrection it will only result in regret and humiliation, except for those who fulfill its rights and discharge its duties properly." So Abu Dhar, like I said, that was his background. He was well known. There are many narrations of his life where he was harsh with others of the companions, and he was not fit for a leadership role. As great as he was, and humble as he was as an individual, as a warrior, and so on, he was just not fit for leadership. The Prophet ﷺ recognized that and mentioned that to him and said, "Listen, you understand that leadership is nothing." He said, the Prophet ﷺ said, by default, leadership is khizyun wa nadama, humiliation and regret. That's the default. That's the starting point on the day of judgment. If you were ever in a position of leadership, you start from there and you have to go up if you can. So imagine that's your baseline. And Omar embodied this hadith. He understood that. That's why he mentions in this, and that was a quote from him. We said like, my head will start, or my face, my cheek, khaddi, starts on the ground, and I'll move up from there based on, you know, how I treat you people and how I deal with the people. So this is how Omar viewed it, and that's how he communicated to the leaders under him. He said, "This is how we're going to start. This is your baseline." And that's why plenty of times they resisted and said like, "Oh, you know what? Maybe it's not a good idea to work under Omar." And he understood that leadership, as we mentioned before, it attracts a certain personality. In the modern world, because it's a system that, you know, exists in the moment, it's leadership is mainly by voting, and before you get voted, then you campaign first. So campaigning is sort of, it goes against a humble nature, but it's part of the system. Even if someone is humble, he has to do it. He or she has to do it. Like there's definitely politicians that we agree with, politicians that we support and we voted for in this past election. But still, if you think about it, the concept of campaigning, you put yourself out there. You have to mention your virtues as much as possible. You have to exaggerate your virtues. That goes against any type of humble nature. Yes or no?
Yes.
It goes against what Islam teaches, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, right? But it's just part of the game, that you're not going to get any position of leadership and do a better job than the next person unless you do it this way. So Omar realized, understood that the methods that he used, he was trying to fight this type of thing. The type of person who was motivated by putting themselves out there and seeking leadership, he wanted to make sure they would not be motivated to seek it in his time. So that's where the conditions came in, because if they were motivated by wealth and status, they're not allowed to ride the better horses. The people in the town who are richer than them will be riding those horses. So now you're stuck, you know, riding lower quality. So if you were about prestige, if you were about wealth, you're not allowed to. And people will complain about you immediately, because they know what your standard you're held to. You're not allowed to eat the better food. So even if you're making a salary, a government salary, which it might be good, you still have to buy lower quality food. So he's like, so if someone was after, you know, relaxing and getting that, they can't even do that. And there's one instance in which Umar visited one of the Sahaba, who was a governor appointed by Umar. And he traveled and visited him in his home. And back then they had homes that were made of like sort of mud brick. So depending on the region, in that region they had like mud bricks. So they were like bricks, but so the walls would be bare. So it wouldn't be painted, it wouldn't be plastered and so on. It would be a bare mud brick. So what they would do, you know, in that region, they would like buy a carpet, but this was sort of like a wall. So it would be a carpet, but you cover up the entirety of the wall with it. So that's your wallpaper to cover up the mud bricks. So he walks into the governor's home, and this wasn't in his conditions because Umar didn't know this kind of luxury existed. So, and this is a minor, like not a big deal. So he walks into the home and he said, "What on earth is this?" If I remember correctly, it was green. You know, so it's like it's very royal and very good looking, and you know, it does add. You know, nowadays we're so, you know, we take it for granted that we have whatever color we want on our walls, and that adds to the atmosphere. Imagine living in a mud brick home, and that's all you see. You know, it's very humbling. It brings you down. So he sees this green wall, green carpet on the wall. He says, "What on earth is this?" So the Sahabi immediately he knows it's Omar. He says, "Omar, you have to understand. I bought this with my own money." He said, "That's not the point here." He said, "This goes down, and you cannot have this. As long as you're a governor, you do not have a carpet on your wall." And on top of that, as Omar was entering, I forgot to mention when he visited this Sahabi, he had a door, and he had to knock on the door and wait for him to open. So the Sahabi said, "Hey, I mean, everyone has doors here. We're not living in Medina anymore." By the way, in Medina, a lot of times they still had curtains for doors. So like homes, there was a lot of peacefulness, security. So like homes didn't have a front door at all. It was a curtain, and you tie it on the side, whatever, and nobody can come in until they knock or whatever. So he said, "Hey, people have doors. Like people have moved on." He said, "My governors don't have doors. You get rid of your door, you put a curtain, or you're not working for the government." And that's all. And the thing is, he wouldn't let him just quit either. So he said, "You know what? In that case, I'm out." He said, "No, you're not out. I need you. You're a good leader. You're a Sahabi. You lived with the Prophet ﷺ. You put your, I know your integrity, and I can't trust anyone else at the time being. You're sticking around." So when he offers him like you have to do this, or you can quit, he's not really letting him quit. So subhanAllah, he wouldn't let him have doors. And like I said, some of these things you can hear, you can say, "Oh wow, that's a bit extreme," or "That's definitely extreme." But that's how he wanted to set that precedent. He said, "I will not allow sociopaths and the people who are willing to step over others to seek leadership in my government or in Islamic government in his philosophy." He said, "Those people, I want them to be so discouraged that they're, it sticks in their mind that don't bother to try to be a governor, don't bother trying to seek your way to the Khilafah, because you're not going to get the things that you desire, the power, the status, the wealth. It's not coming your way." So again, even if it was with their own wealth, and with that, we're going to go to an example here. With Abdullah ibn Umar. Who's familiar with Abdullah ibn Umar? I mean, from the name.
Is he the son?
He's the son of Umar radiallahu anhu. So as I mentioned, he was alive during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and he was a teenager at Uhud. So he was, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he was in his early 20s. So he was in his own right, he was a companion. And he spent years and years following the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, he was young. So while his father was working and Abu Bakr was working, he would like follow the Prophet ﷺ around. And he learned so many of the sunnahs, and he was one of the strongest adherents to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He tried to follow as much as he could. So the reason I mention this is because he was a companion in his own right. He wasn't just the son of Umar. He was his own status, even regardless of Umar being there or not. But because he's the son of Umar, obviously you're the son of the Khalifa. It's equivalent to being the son of the president now, of a nation that's 1 or 2 million strong, right? So, of course, that affords you a little bit of status. Besides being a companion, people already know who you are. Besides being someone who was of high status and wealth, he wasn't that like super wealthy, but he was well off. And he was also, now he's the son of the Khalifa, right? So people are, anytime he walks in the street, he's recognized, he's treated well, whatever, so on and so forth. So, Umar, listen to this. Abdullah ibn Umar had a flock of sheep, just like anyone else. You have a flock of sheep, a flock of goats, whatever, and those sheep had to graze. So back then you had 2 ways to graze. You had the public lands or you had private. So if you owned a few kilometers or whatever, you just have your sheep grazing your land and within your boundaries and so on, that's it. If you didn't own that much land, there was no place for your flock to graze, you just go to the public grazing spot. So it was like, acres of land where anybody can go and let their sheep, their camels graze, and at night you bring them at home. So Abdullah ibn Umar did not have land to my knowledge, so he would just go to the public grazing spot with everyone else. And so far, keep this in mind, he's the son of the Khalifa. Imagine the son of the president now going to dealing with public transport and dealing with everyone else, and having to deal with sharing resources with everyone else at their level. That barely exists today. It almost doesn't exist today. Back then, it was unheard of. And don't forget, this was at the time when the Persian Empire existed. The 2 superpowers of the world at the time were what?
Byzantine and Persians?
The Byzantine Empire, which was a branch of the Roman Empire, and the Persian Empire. So the Roman Empire in general, they were the superpower. Byzantine were the ones that the Arabs dealt with at the time. And then the Persian Empire. Those were 2 superpowers of the whole world. Like they were much more advanced than the Muslims, and the Muslims caught up over time. So like Omar was aware, like maybe not at that time, but later on, before he passed away, he was aware of the Kisra, the leaders of the Persian Empire, and how they lived. One such leader, just to give you guys paint a picture for you, his palace in Persia at the time, in order to enter to visit the emperor, like the front door, like obviously you enter, you pass through a million guards, and then when it comes to have a sitting with the king has his own entrance, or the emperor, sorry, but the door opens from here, like this, it's sealed off from here. So the only way to enter is to bow, and to walk in bowing. That's how arrogant they were. And the floors were all embroidered with gold, and the pillars and the chair. Like this narration, I'm bringing it from one of the tabi'een, one of the generation after the Sahaba, when they were visiting one of these Persian emperors. And he said, I'm not bowing. Like this is a tabi'een, he's not even one of the Sahaba, he's later on. And he had like raggedy clothes, and he didn't care too much. And he had a meeting with the emperor. That's how much, how high the Muslims had risen. So they said, after he checked, they made him check his weapons, and they said, enter, go ahead, speak with the king. He said, I'm not going in there. Like it's opening, I'm not bowing to nobody. So they said, this is the only way you can enter to speak to the king. So he entered backwards. and the king was extremely offended, the emperor, sorry, was extremely offended. But they spoke, and they had a meeting, subhanAllah. So he said, I'm not bowing to nobody, otherwise I'm leaving. So he entered, so he improvised and spoke to the king that way. But can you believe the level of arrogance? Like it got to their heads. Gold, it wasn't enough to have a gold throne, it wasn't enough to do it. Now you have to make the people who are not willing to bow to you, now they're just forced to by a technicality. So they didn't bow on purpose, whether they crouch, whether they crawl. But as long as you can tell how they view themselves versus the average individual. Versus what Omar treated his governors versus the average individual. They're not allowed to have doors. They're not allowed to even ride what other people are riding. So you can see how they viewed governorship versus how their peers in the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire treated governance and treated leaders. So Omar said, we're not going to devolve into that, where you're sitting in the gold throne, not under my watch. And you can see in here, he'd walk barefoot, and he would walk in slippers and so on. Even though people have a misunderstanding. They think there wasn't access. The Arabs lived that way because there wasn't access. No, there was plenty. And there were Sahaba, some of you guys might not like this, there were Sahaba who did spend their wealth. And they did wear the finest clothes. But they gave their charity, they gave their sadaqah and so on. Uthman radiallahu anhu was known for that. Uthman radiallahu anhu would give charity as far as the eye can see. He was just a very wealthy businessman. And when he would hear that an area was in need of food, he would send a caravan as far as the eye can see. So it would be like 100 camels, 200 camels of charity, just straight up, to people he had never met, will never meet. But when it came to his own wealth, he would use his own wealth. And so, like I said, Islam doesn't force you into the one-size-fits-all cookie cutter. As long as you're doing right by society, and we mentioned social justice and equity and giving people what they're owed, then it's not haram to enjoy some of the blessings that Allah's given you. Omar understood that it wasn't, but he said, I'm going to hold myself and those in power to a higher standard. And that's the precedent I want to set. So, we'll go back to Abdullah ibn Umar. So Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar, is in his late 20s now, maybe in his 30s. He has his own flock of sheep, just like everyone else, or just like the well-off people in society. Nothing out of the ordinary so far. He's grazing his sheep. So he spends the whole season, maybe a year, maybe two, grazing there. Omar is busy running the affairs of society. He either doesn't know or doesn't care. It's irrelevant. I mean, that's where I want him. I don't want the king. I don't want my son to be in some private field getting high quality food for his sheep, uninterrupted. He's dealing with the people just like he is. So when it came to the season where the sheep are either slaughtered, and eaten and so on, or sold, when it was a season for that, usually they're nice and fluffed up. They've eaten, they're strong. He called Abdullah, his son, into the courts. So he told him, here's what's going to happen. So he's talking to his own son now. And he told him, oh yeah, by the way, bring your sheep. So he's coming to the I don't want to say palace, it was not a palace. He's coming to where they were, what would you say, the courts or the official government building or whatever it was. And he brings his sheep and he's telling him, listen, here's my command as Khalifa and as your father. Here's what's going to go down. You're going to sell every last one of these sheep. And not only that, you're not getting all the full price of it. You're going to get the average cost of a sheep, we're going to see in the market, what's the average sale of a sheep? Your sheep, we're going to sell it for whatever they sell for. And you're only going to keep the average. So let's say they sell for $600 a piece, and the average is 500. The extra $100 per sheep, that's going to the treasury, Beit al-Mal. Abdullah bin Omar is a very, very, if you just read his story, he's a very pious, humble person. He said, what? This is my money. Like, what do you, there's nothing, I know my dad. I know that I tiptoed my entire way with this. I did nothing wrong. Why am I losing, you know, I worked hard on these sheep and so on and so forth. Why, first of all, I don't want to sell them all now. And, you know, maybe they're gonna, you know, they give birth and so on, so my sheep, my flock grows and I sell them as needed. He said, no, you can take the cash and start another business, but you're selling them right now. So, I want your thoughts. Why do you think Omar did this to him?
Did the sheep graze? They graze on the public land, right?
They graze on public land the entire time.
Was it supposed to be a punishment?
I guess it was just his way. I don't know if it's a punishment, but he said, yeah, basically. We'll get back to you in a minute. Sister has her hand.
Because he's using what the public resources.
But he's a citizen. He's allowed to use it, right? Yes.
So like coming back to like how Omar ibn Khattab treated his governors, he treated his son the same way, as in if people view you in a higher position, so you should lower yourself down under everybody.
Okay, so yeah, so Omar was, his son, Abdullah was banned from any governance. But still, when he walks around, people say, that's the Khalifa's son. So you should lower yourself, he's a citizen, so he can't even graze, so what's he supposed to do with his sheep? Where could they graze?
I think maybe when he was grazing the sheep, there were other people there, and it may have taken up their space.
Yeah, but it's first come, first serve, right? When you go to a public park, if there's another citizen there, I mean, that's it, right? Yes.
He doesn't need like the excess. Like if he was gonna become wealthy off of the sheep, he doesn't need that excess because Omar lives to a standard and he holds his son to that same standard.
But good, I like that. We're all getting there because time's running out. I'm gonna say it, inshallah. But yeah, so he was, by the way, he's like in his 30s at this point. He's married. He lives a lot. He lives, he doesn't live with dad anymore and whatever. But still, he's holding his son to these standards, and he gave that command as Khalifa. So he's a citizen. He's allowed to graze on public sheep. Omar didn't have on public land. Sorry, he didn't have a problem with that. He said, "Here's the problem. And he didn't have a position in government, but he said, whenever you walk by with your sheep, everyone at the public grazing land says, make way for the Khalifa's son. Like, you're not going to let your sheep graze from Sinai. So they would all move out the way and let you graze until your sheep get full. He said, my proof is that your sheep are really well fed compared to the average. The fact that we can sell them for higher is proof enough for me. Now obviously this is not proof enough in the court of law. But he said, you're my son, I'm holding you to a higher standard. The fact that people will continue to move out the way, just look at this perceived, it's not even a guaranteed benefit. It's just a perceived benefit. You could argue back and forth, and Sahaba and Abdullah would argue and say, come on, you're just pushing me too far. I can't have a door, people have doors now, etc. He said, this is how it's going to go down. So he made him sell them, and he gave him the average cost per sheep. He said, the rest of the money, since the people moved out of the way of the public grazing ground for you, then that's technically the public's money. It's going back to the treasury to go for roads, for charity, for the public, and so on and so forth. So that's the standard he held his son to. Like, not even any perceived benefit that you get because of your status, because of my status, I'm going to go out of my way to bring it down. And that's just how he perceived it. And I think there's a strong, beautiful beauty in that we do not see in leadership. Not just to make yourself humble and make yourself on people's level. He said you're going to go lower. And by virtue of being higher, you got to bring yourself lower. And by virtue of people in society being even lower than the average, we got to bring them up to the average. That was his whole life's work. Bring the top to the middle and bring the bottom up to the middle so people can enjoy a standard of living and they don't be so far off from each other. So because of time running out, we have about 10 minutes inshallah. I want to move on to the second, even though I had a few more examples, maybe in the future we can discuss them. We'll move on to the second category, which is his awareness that human rights were due to his constituents, to the people living under his rule. So when you hear about Omar ibn Khattab and how harshly he treated the rich and the powerful, you get this idea of, okay, so he's all about laws and all about rules and he doesn't care about humanity. Yes or no? Do you get this impression? All right, you're good people, mashallah. So I'm going to use this now, maybe because I've been raising my voice. So you sort of, if you want to be objective, or if someone who doesn't already appreciate Omar radiallahu anhu is reading this, they might say, oh, he was just harsh. That's how he was. He wasn't soft-hearted. He didn't care for people. He just cared for rule of law. So this shows you the exact opposite. I have like 4 examples here, but I think we'll just deal with one because of time, inshallah. He was not like that at all. In fact, his harshness towards the rich, as we keep mentioning, and towards the powerful, was because of the humanity. Because he did not allow, he did not want a society in which people can't afford to eat the best kind of flour, where all the governors and the rich people are eating it on a daily basis. Until everyone's eating it. I remember there was a famine, during his time there was a harsh famine, and he didn't eat meat for a long time. It was over a year, if I'm not mistaken. And he said, I swear that I will not eat meat ever again until the poorest person under my rule is able to eat meat. Once that happens, I'll go back to eating meat. So he was vegetarian for a while, until the famine was over, until Allah blessed them once again. So that's just how he looked at life. He said, if the highest person is enjoying equality that the lowest person does not have access to, that's injustice, in his understanding, in his philosophy. And he said, even if it's me, even if it's my son, even if it's perceived, and it's not fully justified, or what was it, fully verified, it's okay to overstep or to step over the toes of the rich in his mind, which I think it's a very beautiful philosophy, even though it can be argued. It's okay to step on the toes of the rich, but it's never okay to step on the toes of the poor and the weak, which I think we could use a lot of that in our modern day, subhanAllah, despite how advanced we believe ourselves to be. So, with regards to how he considered human rights, and how he cared for every bit of it, let's see which example, because I have several here. Okay. Let's use this one, and this is a 2-parter, so that's a good one. So, a few years into his Khilafah, the Muslim wealth, like the system was going really good, and there was a lot of people accepting Islam, a lot of nations entering into the faith, and the Muslim Ummah grew very, very wealthy. So they had Bayt al-Mal, which was the treasury set up by the Prophet ﷺ and advanced by Abu Bakr and Omar. So Bayt al-Mal was the equivalent of a treasury. Today, they had government employees, they had zakah, which they would hand out, they had sadaqah, which they would, which is, it's not as strict as zakah, and they had, that money would also go to building roads, schools, government forces, it would pay the stipend of the army, and so on and so forth. So after all those systems were put into place, and that money was being used for all those services, there was still money left over. That's how advanced the Ummah has gotten. Like, they covered everything, and there was a surplus. So it's what you would call in the modern day a budget surplus of that year, right? So, what does a company do when there's a budget surplus?
Spend it.
Get bonuses.
It goes to the CEO and his buddies. That's it. Like Sears is going bankrupt, right? And they just gave their CEO a bonus of like $35 million, and they're going bankrupt. That's just common across the board. And I mentioned companies, you might say, oh, that's a private company versus the government. The governments do 50 million times worse in our own government and the entire world, literally. The bonuses are disguised as something else, but they're literally just bonuses. And they don't wait until there's a surplus to do that. When there's an extreme deficit, they're still getting paid. And they're still getting their bonuses. They don't suffer a bit. And that's just how the world, the corruption has reached in the world today. When there was look at his care for human rights. When there was a surplus of wealth, he gathered his Sahaba and the advisors and said, well, what do we do with this? They came up with ideas and ways that it could be utilized, but they eventually reached a conclusion, this is the people's money. This isn't the government's money, this is the people's money. So in that case, we're going to give it out as a stipend to the people. Only the surplus, of course. The services need their money. And the years that there's a surplus, we're going to give out that surplus in the form of a stipend to every citizen of the nation, in that region, of course. So this is what is referred to today as a UBI, Universal Basic Income. As far as I know, I don't know any country that does it. Maybe some of the Khaliji countries tried it out in certain regions. I do know that Sweden or Switzerland, in like 1 or 2 towns, and I think Canada as well, they're considering it now, especially when more automation comes into play. They're worried about what's going to happen to people's jobs. People working jobs are going to be taken over by automation. The solution might be in a UBI. So Omar already did that, subhanAllah, 1400 years ago, when there was no need to. The people don't know there's a surplus. only you and the government, why don't you give yourself fat paychecks like it's being done in the most modern world countries of the world today? That's not how he thought. He said, this is not my money to take. Even a penny of this is too much for me. I'm making my son sell his sheep to give it back to the people because I'm worried that they might step out of the way. Like, he didn't observe them stepping out of the way, by the way. He just said, I know that's what they do for the Khalifa's son. So you better find a business where people won't treat you with preferential treatment. So anyhow, he started giving a stipend. So there were some regulations to this stipend. So if there was, obviously the first case was if there was a surplus that year, that was the first condition. And if there was, they would do the math, they would divide it on the region where that surplus was at. It wasn't like the entire million plus people of the Muslim Ummah, so on and so forth. One of the conditions they put was it goes out to every child over the age of 2. And that's back and forth, but the idea was that a child over the age of 2 stops breastfeeding, and they eat regular food now. So now there's a need to feed them, like there's a need to buy food for them. So they're basically like, just like they're another member of the family who needs to be purchased for and so on. So once they're over the age of 2, they quantified it there. They enter into the system and they receive a stipend starting that month. You register, you add them to the registry. So that was number 1. He considered the money, the wealth that comes to the nation, that was the people's wealth, and he had no right in it, and he had to find a way to get it back to them, even if it means just straight up handing it to the people. Until that surplus was no longer and we needed it for services, then we move it back towards the services. So that was part 1. Part 2 of this example, and we'll stop there inshallah. One day he used to do nightly patrols of Medina. So that was just his concern for the people. He would, once work hours were over and everyone was sleeping, he would walk around and patrol Medina and just make sure that everything was going all right and so on. So on one of these nightly patrols, he passed by a home and heard a baby crying and just like struggling. And he was shocked and he wasn't happy, of course, but babies cry, it happens. So he just walked by and continued his patrol. Next night, he passes by the same house. And again, the baby's shrieking and like it doesn't sound like a normal, woke up from bed crying. But he said, like, I'm not gonna invade the privacy of the people. He walks by again. Third night, same thing. He walks by the house, and this is nighttime, kids should be in bed, and the baby is crying. So he said, you know what, I have to find out what's going on here. I'm the Khalifa, maybe someone's being hurt, someone's being injured, whatever. So he knocks on the door, he says, what's going on? And a woman with her young child show up, and she says, she's like, what do you want? He says, what's going on with you? What's with the kids screeching? I see now like there's the mother is holding the baby. What's what are you doing to this kid to make him cry every day? At this point she has no idea it's Omar, by the way. Not everybody knows the Khalifa by face. There's no like images, there's no photos everywhere like we see now. So she's like, what does this guy want? Like this random guy at nighttime. She's like, listen, the Khalifa Omar has written in the regulations for the stipend, so she's receiving a stipend at that point, but her baby isn't. So she's like, this baby has a few more months to reach 2 years old and be officially eligible for the stipend. So they're still breastfeeding right now. But I was told that if I can prove that the baby eats food, like eats actual regular food, then they'll be added to the registry and they'll start getting a stipend from next month. So I don't have to wait another 5 or 6 months for this baby to receive a stipend because we're poor and we need that money. So I've been trying to, every night I don't allow my baby to breastfeed, so the baby's really hungry and crying, that's why they're crying, and I'm trying to force feed my baby like food, bread and so on. So he said, that's not healthy for the baby, let them breastfeed as long as they need to, and then like move on naturally. She said, yeah, but I want the stipend, we're poor. So Omar the one who stops and he started to weep, and he started to cry, and he says, how many babies have you killed, oh Omar? So that's just how much he thought, like he had no idea this was going on. But he took that burden on himself. He said, oh man, I'm responsible for this. It wasn't on my mind when I put the rule of 2 years old, it was just a logical time to start, because now they need food and so on and resources. He said like, no, now it's, because I didn't think things through and my council, we didn't reach that consideration, it's my fault. How many babies have I killed through mothers using this method? So he leaves when she has no idea it's Omar, and immediately he goes the next day immediately and undoes that ruling or that regulation of you need to be 2 years old. Immediately next day he cancels that, abrogates it, says every single child born, the day they're born the stipend starts, as long as we have a surplus. So subhanAllah, that's how much he cared. Like he cared about every single individual, and he would undo regulations, he would take things into consideration that he didn't know before, and he felt so much, he started to cry, thinking, oh my God, I'm responsible for this. I'm responsible. I was walking by the house thinking, what a bunch of irresponsible parents making this kid cry. He's like, oh no, it was me. It was my problem, my duty. So that's how much he cared. He cared for the family, because, by the way, they were doing this out of poverty, because they wanted the stipend, because they didn't have. So he's saying, that's another thing. I'm gonna, yeah, maybe there's gonna be some abuse of the system, where, you know, people register their kids, etc., whatever, I don't know how. But he said, like, again, we said he was willing to let the poor people step on the government's toes a little bit and get a little bit more than they're due, but he would never allow the rich and the powerful to get that. He would give them less than they're due until they meet somewhere near the middle. So again, we had plenty of examples from both, but I hope the point was delivered, and I hope the message comes across about Omar radiallahu anhu, his dedication to social justice, his dedication to making sure people are treated as humans, and that the statuses in society that exist, that continues to exist till today, the structures that end up devolving to the point where you have someone sitting in a palace and the people have to walk in bowing to them. Even though we don't have that today in that form, where humans will make you bow to the leader, at the end of the day, when you live in a world where 99% of the wealth is held by 1% of the people, if you don't have that in physical form of the population bowing to an individual, you have it in metaphorical form. And you can argue it's even worse. And the disparity is a lot worse because it's hidden now. And people think they're doing okay when they're being robbed in broad daylight. So subhanAllah, it's something to think about. Final word is that when you look at Umar, when you look at the Prophet ﷺ and these great people that lived, we can objectively appreciate the things that they did, but in order to appreciate it even more, just consider the context. Because in modern 2018, when I say, oh, he cared about babies, or he cared about the rights of the weak, you'll say, oh yeah, I mean, that's normal, that's average every day. We live in a world, alhamdulillah, in our country here, where, you know, if you're, you know, God forbid your child is disabled or something, there's a bunch of services available. There's services for the weak, there's services for the poor, even though they're not perfect, but they exist. But keep in mind, the society, go back 1400 years, when nobody cared about these things for a large percentage of society. And he was pioneering this stuff, and he was saying, based on the Quran, based on what I know Allah wants from me, I owe this to society. I owe them to give them these services. So, subhanAllah, it's something to think about. Definitely, I would recommend watching this series if you haven't. I would also recommend, if you would like to buy or download or find online, a book called Omar, The Life and Times, or The Life and Times of Omar, something like that. You'll find it. It's translated into English from Arabic. It's a really good book. You find a lot of these instances and narrations, and it goes through his life until his death. Jazakumullah khairan. I appreciate you listening.